Who is his prime audience for these messages? Is it the Western enemy world, or is it the Muslim world where he's seeking his support?
It's the latter. I think he wants to put the Western enemy world on notice that here is a Arab Muslim warrior who will fight you to the end, who will not stop at anything to tell you that your aggression will be met with similar aggression. And in fact, the Lex Talionis message comes up again and again in some of these interviews where he says, you know, if you really think this is bad, remember what was done to us. We are only doing it kind. And I would say of all the interviews, and in fact all the messages in here, the one that is the most telling about bin Laden's own justification and his own speaking to the Arab masses rather than, let's say, to the Western audiences in Europe and America, is the interview he has with a journalist named Tayseer Allouni. Tayseer Allouni is the most interesting figure after bin Laden. I think he's more interesting than Zawahiri in terms of this whole episode of early 1990s through, let's say, 2009. Tayseer Allouni is somebody who'd been a Syrian national who was exiled from Syria, became a Spanish citizen, was then taken on by Al Jazeera to be their stringer, that is somebody who just makes random stories, from Kabul, Afghanistan, and he was there on October 7th, 2001, when the American invasion happened. And I don't know whether you remember, but it was that time when Al Jazeera went over the top in their viewership because they had footage that nobody else had. CNN was taking from Al Jazeera instead of the other way around. And it was Arab audiences that were saying, my gosh, how is this happening? What does it all mean? And Tayseer Allouni gave some very barbed comments that this is the American invader. This is, again, the enemy attacking the Muslim nation. Bin Laden loved it. Bin Laden said to Tayseer Allouni, come up to my cave. I'll give you a real interview. The interview, the only time when bin Laden doesn't take the mic and direct everything. All of his messages, by the way, are not interviews. They're all, this is what I say. Peace be on you, and listen to me, and this is how we'll proceed. Tayseer Allouni, speaking Arabic, having the credentials of having stood up to the United States and said that invasion of Afghanistan was wrong, gets within 2 weeks an interview in the Tora Bora caves with bin Laden. And then he undresses him. I mean, it is the most powerful interview because it's in Arabic, between two devout Muslims with a radically different notion of what Islam means. And Tayseer Allouni catches him on the one point where bin Laden is weakest. Not only his lack of training in Quran and Hadith and Islamic jurisprudence, the killing of innocents. Whatever could justify the killing of innocents? And at a point when bin Laden sort of slips into it and says, well, they killed us, we killed them. Wait a minute, he says, where is this in Islam? And he, Tayseer Allouni, starts to cite other things. Oh no, says bin Laden, you're right. There is a problem with this, but here is the authorities, A, B, C, and D. And they're all, if you will, renegade theologians. And these are the people that he's read as an autodidact. And it's the first time you see it coming out of, you asked me earlier, where did he learn all this stuff? Whoever was his actual teacher, it's these pre-modern sources where people in different circumstances, and there are some Muslim scholars in different circumstances, said, you can kill their innocents if they kill ours first. It has to be defensive, but innocents mean children, women, unarmed civilians can be killed in certain circumstances. 95%, actually maybe it's 98%, it's an overwhelming majority of Islamic jurisprudence says, no, never. You do not kill innocents. That is not the Islamic way. Whatever the provocation, one only battles warriors against warriors. One does not kill women, children, unarmed civilians. So it's a very powerful message.
We're running short on time, but I did want to come to the final question, which has to do with bin Laden himself and whether you think he's alive in a cave somewhere today or not.
It's a question that goes around and comes around. I've been asked that question, I think, almost since I began to myself work on bin Laden. I'm not a 24/7 TV watcher or OBL tracker, but ever since I've been thinking about bin Laden, I've wondered, how come there's so much inconsistency in the messages? I believe the ones that are put together here, which stop in 2004, really do represent a fairly consistent group of messages. There are a lot of pieces of evidence that say to me that the later tapes are not only his, but the biggest reason why I think he's already died, and I would say he has died at least 3 years ago. There are some people, such as David Ray Griffin, who think that he died in December, in fact, December 17th, 2001. I'm not prepared to say it. I'm not going to say that he died at the end of 2001. But the reason I think that he is deceased is, had he been alive, had he remained alive, all of these earlier messages, which are filled with vitriol, filled with a combative sense, but also with a recognition or at least a projection of his own authority. This is a man who wants to be on tape. This is a man who wants to be heard. This is a man who wants to be acknowledged as the leader of the Muslim world. I don't think that he would have remained as intermittent and as seldom responding to world crisis as he has been since 2002 or 3, were he alive. So it's circumstantial. I don't have DNA test. I don't have a track of where the grave is in Tora Bora, but I'm sure that if he did die, he died in Afghanistan, and that he requested or required that it be a private funeral. And I think someday we'll discover that that happened, and it may have happened as far ago as Griffith says, which is 2001, but I think more likely 2003.
That's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank Bruce Lawrence, Professor of Religion at Duke University. On behalf of the National September 11th Memorial Museum, I'm Clifford Shannon.